I'm Charlie Bride of Gold Derby, and today I am talking with Rachel Fleit, the director of the documentary Bama Rush, which is currently streaming on HBO Max. First question I have, or Max as it is now being called. First question I wanted to ask you was, did you? It's interesting how you incorporate your own personal story into the film. And I was wondering, did you plan on including your personal story in the film on the outset, or was that something that came about later during the production?
Yes. I had no intention of putting myself into this film. That was not even a thought that crossed my mind. I pride myself on being a fly on the wall, a verite documentary filmmaker. I want to disappear and let life unfold and capture it on a camera. But in the process of making this film, as I was getting to know my subjects, the young women in this film, and we were sitting in their college dorm or on their off-campus college apartment, I would sort of tell them my own personal story story of belonging, and just as a way to connect to them and build that kind of bond and that trust that's so important for filmmaking, especially the kind that I was doing. And I just would continuously tell them the story of wearing a wig and then taking my wig off. And during the edit, my editor came to me at a certain point, sort of midway through the process, and he said, "Rachel, I'm so sorry, but I think you're going to have to be in this movie." I was like, no, 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 no. What do you mean? That's crazy. Why would I be in the film? And it was discussed. And, my goal was extreme empathy for these young women. I didn't want to make them seem silly, or I wanted to treat them with the utmost respect and admiration. And because I identified with them, I got it. I understood, we all want to belong, and we do all sorts of things to belong. And it became so clear after my initial resistance, it became so clear that if I wanted to create the most amount of empathy for these young women, that I had to stand shoulder to shoulder with them and say, same, me too. I did this. This is what my rush looked like. And ultimately, it was my goal was for you as an audience to say, you know what, this is how I rushed. And then, my personal story was, a plan. We were attempting it. It was technically and creatively extremely challenging to weave the right amount of my story in, because I didn't want to take away from the young women, but I wanted to just sort of buoy them. And then when the rumor about the film itself sort of broke out on TikTok and across social media, my alopecia became this character in a way that the film became a character, in that I was named as being part of this sort of potentially surreptitious documentary. And I had to actually go undercover and put a wig back on my head. So the first part of the film became so clear in the creative process of editing the film that it needed to be there to show the power of the system, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. So I was wondering if you could go in a bit into what made the University of Alabama stand out as the kind of place to tell a story about rushing sororities. What made that institution? Because Greek life is such a is to a bigger or smaller degree can be a part of many colleges and prestigious universities all across the country. What made University of Alabama stick out?
Yeah. So I wanted to make a documentary about the sorority system in America since 2018. And I started some preliminary research, and I just felt like it was right on the heels of the Me Too movement, and during the age of consent. And I started to think, like, what would it be like to be a young college woman in Greek life during this moment? And then I got kind of basically distracted because, excuse me, I started making a documentary about Selma Blair in 2019. And so I had to put that idea on the shelf. As soon as Selma Blair, after we were done filming and after the film was released, which is now on Max as well, I just, started having meetings with other production companies, and they would say, okay, Rachel, what's next? And I said, you know what? I want to take this idea down off the shelf and make a documentary about Greek life, specifically sorority women. And people really responded to that, especially Vice Studios. And they were just like, that's amazing. Like, let's keep talking about it. And then what happened, and the reason why we went to Alabama, is that the viral sensation of hashtag Bama Rush goes crazy on TikTok. And so Vice called me back and they said, Rachel, do you want to go down to Alabama and film these young women during Rush? And I was fascinated by the TikToks. And I actually thought focusing on a specific place could allow me to make the kind of film that I wanted, because I always want to make something that's character driven. I always, I feel like there's so much universality in the specificity, and like character driven stories really tell us so much versus an overview. And so going to Alabama, who had the spotlight on them because of hashtag Bama Rush, just made sense.
So one of the other things that there are certain parts that do get a bit creepy in the movie, and I think probably the one that sticks out the most for me is when we are first learning about what the machine is, which is like one of the most ominous sounding names, which is apparently what they call themselves too. How creepy was that as you were finding out more and more? Because like it's so weird when you are interviewing the two young women who are actually in a sorority, and you ask them about that, and they look at each other first, and they're like, we don't really know about that. And then you hear the journalist from the 80s talk about it. I mean, what was it like learning about the existence of this organization that's like above all the other sorority and Greek organizations?
It was crazy. I mean, I remember specifically where I was in the process. We were just like we were having a lot of meetings with college women and, at coffee shops and various places around Tuscaloosa. And I remember just like having a phone call with these kids who were in the SGA, the Student Government Association, and they were like against the machine, and we were just learning about what this thing was, and it just was mind-blowing that this sort of thing exists, especially like, I've heard of secret societies and skull and bones and all of that, but the power of the machine, it seemed at Alabama, was just something else. And the tradition, I mean, it's like 100 years old, and the infiltration it has at the university, and then sort of the way it trickles out into state and even federal government politics. It was creepy, and especially the threats of physical violence. And we include some in the film and sort of the graphics animation section during the machine part of the movie, where we really dive into that. Like this young woman had a knife wound on her face because of the machine there. And it had to, that incident like actually made Alabama shut down student government for 2 years, but then it came back, and they're still to this day up to their antics, and it's alarming. I can't help but think, though, that it's a bit of a microcosm, and that this sort of thing happens everywhere.
Feels like it's Alabama's own version of the deep state.
Exactly.
um what's interesting is when you're you're doing this documentary about both these young women who are actually active in the sororities, and then these young women that are also looking to become a part of it. And people who might go into this might start watching this documentary will very likely might enter this documentary with so many preconceived notions about what these women are like. And I was wondering, for you, for both the women that were in the sororities and the perspectives that were hoping to join, what was the most surprising thing that you learned about them as a collective?
So the most surprising thing I learned about them as a collective was that they are just so much like me, and like all of us human beings who like just have a desire to make friends, belong, feel a part of something greater than ourselves. Like that was a really profound experience, that like underneath the layers, right? Like when we lifted up the hood of the car, I was like, oh, these young women with like long blonde hair and like really good tans who are like, quote unquote, the beauty ideal, have the same struggles that I had, have the same struggles that I have. They're just, it's really like that was this sort of surprising spiritual experience of making this film, is seeing how similar we all are.
I mean, it really is just this wonderful unifying thing, and you really explore their lives so interestingly. But then towards the end, that the film takes that turn when unsuspectingly you become a part of this whole thing, when the rumor, when the whole thing about there being a documentary being filmed, the word gets out, and then of course the rumor mill and social media and college gossip just does what it does. And it's really surreal. And I was just wondering, like, you talk about it a little bit in the movie, but I wonder if you could just elaborate on what was it like, when your presence being discussed on campus within Greek life, on social media, and it just reverberating all the way, all throughout seemingly the campus.
It was extremely stressful. I mean, here's the thing that was the stress was that, for me, was that I needed to make sure that my the participants of this film, the young women that I was sort of following, were going to still trust me. And 75% of them still trusted me. There was like that one out of the four that decided that she no longer trusted us. And she believed the rumor, it seemed, because she stopped filming with us. This is full of spoiler alerts. So it was so upsetting to me, because what was happening was that there was this crazy rumor on TikTok that I was doing surreptitious filmmaking, and that there were HBO was flying drones over the sorority row during Rush, and there were girls saying that this was the end of Greek life as we know it, that we were coming down there and doing, illegal activities. And it's just, none of it was true. And on the converse of that, I'm sitting there talking to these young women about like really serious issues, like the most serious issues that young women face today. We're talking about it. And that's the substance of this film. And that was my intention in the film, was to make a story about what it means to be a young woman right now through the lens of the sorority system at the University of Alabama. So I just was so frustrated that I was that this was happening, because it was just not what we were doing. And my main concern was my subjects, making sure that they were safe. The tensions were so high in Tuscaloosa. Like, I'm not exaggerating. It was nearly impossible for us to pull out a camera in that town. And it was really difficult. Like, we had to really readjust our filmmaking strategy. And then it was finally on bid day, which is a public event, we were able to just really film. And it was so fun, because honestly, like bid day was so joyous. And even after this very stressful week where we were, trying to assure our subjects that we were, not who these rumors said we were. And then to have this final day of filming that was just so much fun. It was just like full of joy and full of life. It was a good way to end things because ultimately, this is a movie about belonging, and bid day is like the ultimate day of belonging. You're invited to join your house.
And you see the hard work that so many of them put into that. And like you said, I think you said, what was it, like the average amount of what it costs to actually do the whole Rush thing is what, like $8,500, I think you said it was.
Yeah, the fee to be a part of the sorority for new members is $8,300 a year. That's the average. So it's that some houses are higher, some houses are lower. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was expensive when mine was $500. And that just blew that out of the water.
Yeah, I mean they do get 3 meals a day at the house, but it's a lot. A lot of people just don't have that kind of money.
The person who ended up pulling out, her name was Shelby, right?
Yes.
Do you know if she succeeded in getting a bid?
Oh yes, she was invited to join Phi Mu, which is a top tier house.
Okay. Well, I'm very glad to hear that for her. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you all the best over this upcoming Emmy season. And to all of our viewers, please like this video, subscribe, and make sure to stick with Gold Derby and as Emmy nominations come up on July 12th. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Charlie.